everybody, welcome to Country Girl with Kathy Jarvis. And today we're going to talk about growing year-round in unheated greenhouse. And I'm in zone 6A, but these first two tips are good for anybody in any zone. And that is, if you're going to grow year-round, you have to know your temperatures and you have to know when the day length, what the day length is in your area. I'd say the most important one is the daylight length in your area. You should know when the 10-hour period starts and when it ends. And for me, that's usually around January 30th is when the sun is in the position that allows 10 hours of sunlight to hit my greenhouse. And it's around November the 6th when it disappears. Now, what does that mean? That means that between January 30th and November 6th, I have enough daylight for my plants to actually grow and thrive. Between November 6th and January 30th, there's not enough daylight for them to actually grow. They will survive, but they won't really take off and grow. So that means that I can do most of my growing. I need to get the plants in and have them reach maturity almost before November 6th in the fall. And it also means I shouldn't really start anything in the greenhouse until after February 6th for it to have enough light to germinate and to grow. So the second thing, of course you could use supplemental lights if you wanted to, but that's going to increase you have to have electricity out there, and it's going to increase your electric bill, and you have to do the pros and cons. Is it worth it or not? So the other thing you have to consider is the temperature, especially if it's an unheated greenhouse. You have to grow your cool weather crops during the cool time of the year and your warm weather crops during the hot part of the year. Very simple. Okay? Unless, of course, you're going to add heat. But then again, that's another expense. And you have to balance out whether it's worth it or not. You know, it would be cheaper to go and buy that tomato at the store, or to spend all that money each day that's growing just to get the tomato. So you have to consider what's best for you and do what's good for you. Now, what I usually do is I start planting in the greenhouse in February. This is when my daylight has reached 10 hours a day. Temperatures are usually consistent for cool weather crops, so I can put in my lettuce, my kale, my radishes, beets, and carrots, and peas, usually by mid-February. And I can begin sowing the warmer weather ones in areas that are warmer, because sometimes you'll have microclimates in your greenhouse where a section will be warmer than anywhere else. And if you are using a heater, the area closer to the heater will be warmer than the areas next to the outside of the greenhouse, the siding of the greenhouse. So if you're going to try doing your seeds in there, find the warm spot for them, and that's where you can start them. I prefer to start my warm weather crops upstairs, and when the nighttime temperatures are consistently at 55 degrees, that's when I'll move the little seedlings out into the greenhouse. And then I'll watch the temperature very carefully, and if it says it's going to drop below that, I'll either turn on the propane heater or I'll bring them back into the house. But you can't leave them out there when the temperature drops. They're just too young and too little to tolerate the cold weather. So that means that as early as January and February, I can start plants indoors to be taken out to the greenhouse. I can start my bell peppers, my celery, my hot peppers, my oregano, my rosemary, and also thyme. Now, in the beginning of February, I can actually I usually start to direct sow my radishes and I do my kale. Some people like to start them indoors, like they'll start their basil and their broccoli and their cabbages and their cauliflowers and the eggplants and the kale and the sage, tomatoes and oregano all inside around the February the 20th. In fact, I just got through starting a bunch of peppers and tomatoes this past week. And they're upstairs on the heating mat and underneath lights. And they will stay there until the temperature gets to 55 degrees at night, and then they'll start hardening off in the greenhouse. Now, from February 23rd, you can usually start your lettuce and your Swiss chard inside to be transplanted out. Then you can directly sow your spinach and your peas into the greenhouse. So I'll be doing that next week. I've got spinach out there growing from last fall yet, so I'm not too worried about my spinach. In March becomes a little bit busier. March is the daylight is even lengthening even more, so the plants are growing more quickly. And you can start putting your warm weather crops out there to germinate, such as your beans, your basil, cucumbers, and squash. And you can start harvesting what you planted in February. Now in March and April, I usually wait until end of April to put out some of these things. But in March, you can direct sow your carrots, chives, and your onion sets, your turnips, parsnips, and parsley. Now you can also transplant out your cabbages and your Swiss chard and your kale. And you can start inside. If you're going to put these in your greenhouse, you can start them inside now. You can start watermelon, cantaloupe, cucumbers, pumpkin. Okay, near the end of March, you can transplant your broccoli, your cauliflower, your kale, your pumpkins into a greenhouse, and the lettuce. And you can direct sow rocket. April, you can direct sow your parsnips and your beets and your potatoes. Your sage. You can transplant your sage and transplant lettuce and basil, bell peppers, celery, hot peppers, oregano, and thyme can be transplanted into the greenhouse in April. You can also direct sow your dill and your green beans and corn, okra, and winter squash and zucchini into the greenhouse in April. You can transplant tomatoes and cantaloupes, cucumbers, and eggplants, pumpkins, and watermelon into the greenhouse around April. Now by May, things are really starting to heat up and stuff, and you'll be able to harvest your kale and your spinach and your peas. And if you've started some of the cool weather seeds in the greenhouse, those can now be transplanted out to your regular garden if you want to. And that would be your broccoli, your cauliflower, and your cabbages. And again, nighttime temperatures need to be above 45 degrees. And if they're warm season transplants, it has to be above 55 degrees. And that would be your peppers, your tomatoes, your eggplants, and stuff like that. So what I usually do in May is I would direct sow sweet potatoes and zucchinis. And I will start in trays for my fall garden. I will start celery, eggplants, bell peppers, tomatoes, sweet potatoes. Those will be started to be put into the ground, be started in trays to be put into the ground when areas open up from where you harvest in the greenhouse. So you have something always ready to go in. June and July is usually the hottest time of your greenhouse. Depending upon what type of cooling system you have, the warm crops such as the peppers and the eggplants and the beans and the tomatoes will be very, very happy. The other ones will not be so happy. So you kind of have to watch out for overheating during this time. You might want to put on a shade cloth to help keep the sun off the peppers so you don't get sun scald. And you'll have to keep an eye on the humidity. Open up the vents, open up some windows, some doors, the sides, whatever you need to get some air flowing. And in June, You can direct sow pumpkins, sweet potatoes. You can transplant sweet potatoes in, direct sow the cantaloupes. And that's about all you're going to be doing. And you can start your hot peppers for the fall. And July, you can start cabbage for later, bell peppers, eggplants. You can transplant tomatoes in yet. You can direct sow winter squash yet. And you transplant celery in. And you can start cauliflower and broccoli in starting trays to be transplanted into the greenhouse later. Also, you can direct sow cucumbers, green beans, and parsnips. You can transplant hot peppers in, direct sow zucchinis. So there's still a lot of things that you can do to keep your garden going for the rest of the season. August and September, usually this is when you have to start really thinking about that winter garden. November through January, the daylights are going to be shortened to the point where they won't be able to grow very fast. They'll be very slow unless you add lighting. Your go here is to get the winter garden planted early enough so that the most of the plants will reach the maturity by the November or December, because they will slow down throughout the rest of the year. Before the first frost in your area, it's also time to move some of your potted plants inside the greenhouse for the winter. And to what I do in August, I will transplant my cabbage in. I had in those little cells. Same thing with kale. If I need to have an open spot, I'll put the kale in. Transplant the broccoli and the cauliflower. Direct sow more potatoes. Direct sow some peas. And transplant some kale in. And in September, I will direct sow carrots and beets, lettuce, Swiss chard, turnips, rocket and radishes, and my spinach for this winter garden. And that's the end of my winter garden. I try to get everything that done by then so that they have a chance to mature through October and November, and then I can start harvesting and harvest throughout the winter as I need it. October, your days are going to be becoming shorter. You've gotten your winter garden planted, but you still have enough light to start very short cycle crops. Like if you use up all the radishes, you can put more of those in. Anything that takes 20 to 30 days to mature, you can put into the ground in October yet. You can usually still get time to plant some. You should be able to get some spinach, some kale, and some lettuce planted, but they usually will have to overwinter, and then they'll grow really fast when February comes. So you'll have the harvesting between February and March when those other little plants are just now starting to come through. November, December, and January is time to basically rest, clear out what you have, what's dead in the greenhouse, wash your pots, get things ready, harvest what you can harvest, and just kind of relax and plan for the next year. So like I said, we're getting into that busy season. We're starting to warm up. You can get into the greenhouses and start planting. Even if you don't have any heat in them, if you just have, like I said, I just heat when my greenhouse, or I'm having an ice storm or snowstorm. I heat only then to protect the greenhouse structure itself. So you can grow year-round in an unheated greenhouse. I've done it now for the last 2 years. And I learn something every year. So hopefully this information I've given you today will help you to start your journey on a year-round greenhouse. And you may have to add some frost covers, hoop covers. I've done that before. Made a little hoop inside of the greenhouse to help keep some of the plants when it gets really cold and I don't want to add heat. I can throw a frost blanket over them, or I can put a little hoops up and throw some plastic over them, and that helps to keep them warm and helps them to survive throughout the winter, the hardest part of the winter. So, hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video, and Remember, like, share, subscribe. And I would take you out to the greenhouse, but it's pouring down rain outside. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.